one of the inaugural decrees of the nascent Nazi regime, scarcely months after the Reichstag's capitulation in January 1933, was to consolidate the kaleidoscopic array of youth organizations from the fractious Weimar era: Boy Scouts' earnest troops, Wandervogel's wandering romantics, Catholic Gemeinschaften's pious phalanxes, into a monolithic entity under the swastika's shadow, the Hitler Youth, or Hitlerjugend HJ, a vast conveyor belt forging the Reich's future fanatics. It bifurcated into two rigid echelons calibrated to adolescent thresholds: the Jungvolk, Deutsches Jungvolk for the malleable 10 to 14-year-olds, a preparatory forge of loyalty, and the Hitler Youth proper for the 15 to 18-year-olds, hardened into ideological steel. The National Sozialistischer Deutscher Studentenbund NSDSDB, to which I belonged as a precocious 11-year-old, had always been subsumed as an auxiliary limb of the HJ, its intellectual veneer a thin gloss over paramilitary drills. To forestall any whiff of social discrimination, lest the Volksson sense hierarchy sting, the NSDSDB was now wholly absorbed, its debating halls and book clubs dissolved into the HJ's martial mold. Uniforms standardized in khaki shirts and black shorts that chafed like conformity's bite. Though I was not quite 12 years old, still a gawky stripling with scraped knees from playground scuffles, I was automatically transferred to the Jungvolk, my induction a bureaucratic rubber stamp amid the clatter of typewriters in Van Leitstell's dim offices, where party carton fluttered like captured flags. During my inaugural year in the Jungvolk, I was fortunate to draw a leader who evoked the Boy Scouts' wholesome ethos, reminiscent of the earnest schoolmaster who had championed Baden-Powell's movement in our grammar lessons, extolling knots and campfires as bulwarks against urban ennui. This young leader, for 5 years my senior, a lanky 16-year-old with freckles dusting his snub nose and hair tousled like wind-whipped wheat, always wore the gray tunic salvage from his father, a fallen officer in the Imperial Army's Kaiserheer, its wool frayed at cuffs from Somme mud, epaulets faded to ghosts of gold braid. He also blew the fanfare, a slender brass cornet etched with runes, to which was affixed the black ensign emblazoned with the white sea grune, the Jungvolk's talismanic emblem, a lightning bolt cleaving darkness, symbol of victory's inexorable strike. He marched ahead of us, fanfares clarion pealing across Dortmund's cobbled lanes like a herald's call, while we trailed in ragged column. Drums thumping hollow rhythms on oil drum skins, pennants snapping in the Ruhr's sooty breeze, our boots kicking up dust from coal yard fringes. It was a happy time, buoyant as summer's first swim, but a brief one, a candle's flicker before the gale, lasting scant months before the regime's iron fist clenched tighter. Once, this paragon spirited us to a summer camp on the sprawling premises of a farmer in northern Germany's pastoral flats, Niedersachsen's amber fields rolling like rumpled quilts under Mecklenburg's vast skies. We bedded down in the hayloft of a cavernous barn, its rafters festooned with cobwebs like silver veils, the scent of fermented straw and sun-warmed earth lulling us to sleep on prickly pallets stuffed with chaff. We ate the simple but wholesome fare the farmer's wife prepared in her flagstone kitchen, steaming bowls of potato soup thickened with bacon rinds, rye bread dense as peat slathered in farm-churned butter, and milk fresh from the cow stable's dappled Holsteins, its foam beating the tin mugs like dew. In the evenings, as twilight's lavender bruised the horizon, we gathered around the campfire's crackling heart, flames leaping like imps, sparks ascending in pyrotechnic prayers, and sang Boy Scout songs, our voices a harmonious chorus under the wheeling stars. Wandering bird, fly out into the wide land. Our leader accompanied on a cittern, that guitar-like instrument beloved of the youth movement, its pear-shaped body resonant with gut strings plucked in folkloric trills, evoking black forest glades and Rhine's romantic bends. I looked up to this young man as an exemplar of everything decent and romantic about the youth movement. His whistles lilt during hikes, his tales of Baden-Powell's Krugers veldt-spun over campfire's glow, his silhouette against the embers a knight from Nibelungen's saga. Apparently, the leader had also taken a liking to me, sensing perhaps my wide-eyed hunger for ideals untainted by party badges brass. One day, during a home evening in the inhospitable cellar of an industrial building, mine's underbelly, walls weeping damp from coal seam leaks, air thick with furnace cinders and the tang of machine oil, he presented me with a little green book, its cover embossed with the victory rune in silver foil, supple as kid leather. It was a membership booklet carried by the lower leaders, Leader Book's ledger, its pages crisp with oaths and rosters, a talisman of trust. This was his way of saying that I had been appointed youth sheep leader, the lowest rank in the Jungvolk, a shepherd of fledglings. Thus I became the proud leader of some 15 boys, their names listed in the green booklet like a sacred census. Klaus, Fritz, Hans, lads with scabbed knees and dreams as vast as the steppe, my charges in drill and camp's lore. The idol was not to last for long, a fragile bloom trampled under marching boots. For the cherished leader was soon replaced by someone who came fresh from a training course for Hitler Youth leaders. Reich Youth Leadership's forge in Potsdam's barracks, where leader principles lash honed zealots. This young man, about 18 years old and whose first name was Hino, pronounced with a guttural ch like Boxbrook, was almost the exact opposite of our former leader. Where the scout evoked Wandervogel's wanderlust, Hino embodied the steel helmet stomp. Of all the people with whom I was personally acquainted during the Hitler era, he was the most typical Nazi, fanatical as a Gauleiter's rant, ruthless as a stand court's verdict, cynical as Goebbels' smirk. His uniform's white shoulder strap denoting branch leader, equivalent to battalion commander, gleaming like a blade on his khaki sleeve. This leader was the only official in the whole Nazi establishment I was genuinely afraid of, his presence a chill wind scouring the Jungvolk's hearth. Hino completely changed the atmosphere in our unit, transmuting its campfire camaraderie into a barracks clamor. He trained us in all sorts of military skills, from small-caliber shooting with small-caliber rifles crack on shooting ranges berm, lead plinking tin ducks, to throwing hand grenades, stick-hand grenade lobbed into sandpits with detonators hiss. Under his leadership, we performed war games such as smuggling a suitcase, supposedly freighted with dynamite's TNT, leather valise heavy as guilt, into the railway station's bustling train station, dodging conductors' gaze amid steam's veil and porter shouts. We were always divided into two parties battling each other, red versus blue, bayonets fixed on rubber. But Hino pushed us to ever more aggressive fighting. His whistles shriek a starter's gun. Once, my group had to storm a steep embankment, that scarred clay slope behind the mine, nettles stinging shins like hornets, defended by another group entrenched with anti-tank rifles mock. When I had made it almost to the top, scrambling on all fours through thistle and scree, one of the defenders hit me with his infantry spade, entrenching tool's flat blade whistling, so hard under the nose that blood cascaded hot and coppery, cartilage crunching like gravel. I needed medical attention, medic's iodine sting in medical station's glare. The scar is still visible today, a pale crescent above my lip, a lifelong tattoo of that fray. Hino also taught us those Nazi songs that shocked the world, militant anthems blaring from people's receiver's grill, songs like Today Belongs to Us Germany, Tomorrow the Whole World. Its chorus a goose steps thunder, fists pumping like pistons. But even this arrogant ditty was not militant enough for Hino, who scoured song collections for even more belligerent strains, his eyes alight with Führer's fire. Once he unearthed a Cossack song, its steps howl in minor key, of which I remember only the line, "We carry calluses from the sabers on our hands," sung with sabers, clash-mimed, blades of wood whistling. The source selection was not incidental, for Hino was fascinated by the East, particularly the vast plains of Russia, Eastern Europe's endless ochre, Volga's wind-swept bend. His heroes, the Knights of the German Order, Teutonic Order of German Knights, who conquered and settled the Baltics during the Middle Ages, Livonia's crusades in chainmail and cross. Once, Hino put me to a test by ordering me to conduct a home evening about knighthood. Home evening circle in Innsgloom. Undoubtedly, he had the German Order's sword brothers in mind, Marienburg's moat. But I misunderstood him and innocently recounted the saga of Siegfried slaying the dragon Nibelungenlied's forge. I took the story from one of my schoolbooks that stemmed from the pro-Nazi era, its illustrations lurid with flame and fang. In this version of the epic, Siegfried dug a hole in the dragon blood-soaked earth that enabled him to stab the monster from below into his soft underbelly. Fafnir's scales rent, ichor gushing like oil. At that point, Hino indignantly interrupted me, face flushing crimson. "That's how cowards fight, not knights." He scoffed, adding on a more ominous note, "You will never be a fighter." It meant that I had failed the test, a gauntlet dropped in campfire's ash. That was the beginning of the end of my career in the Jungvolk, a demotion's shadow lengthening. Everything Hino said and did was designed to foster our fighting spirit, a relentless forge. That's why he taught us songs like We Love the Sea and the Surging Waves. The gray face of the icy storms, he said it was a Viking song. And we should pronounce the hijo of the refrain so that it sounded Scandinavian rather than German. North Sea's gale in our throats. His signature song went like this. The mightiest king in the realm of the air is eagle, begotten by the winds. The birds tremble when they hear his voice, the mighty beating of the wings. When the lion roars, through the desert it resounds. The animal world quakes before the horror. Oh yes, we are the lords of the world, the rulers of the seas. Sung with fists clenched, eyes fixed on horizon's haze. Today, I believe that Hino really understood what Hitler wanted him to do. That is, mold us into fearless conquerors, berserkers breed. His favorite word was ruthless, which also happened to be Hitler's preferred adjective. Spat like a whip in my struggles rant. 50 years later, in America's mosaic of tongues, I was amazed how often I heard or read a very different expression. Human decency, a phrase warm as fire. It struck me then that I had never heard this expression in Nazi Germany. Humanity's murmur silenced. Today, I believe that it could have saved my soul from being enslaved by the evil of Nazism had I heard it spoken once or twice by a person of authority, instead of ruthless or merciless, along with the German order's Hino's heroes, the Vikings who pillaged England in dragon-prowed longships and conquered the Atlantic coast of North America, Vinland Saga, and the Vandals who ransacked Rome in Alaric's horde, Colosseum's sack. Thus, most of Hino's songs dealt with piracy, Corsair's keel, conquest, and plundering, Moody's gleam. Of course, there were more moderate songs which Hino did not favor, dismissed as weakling's whine. One that I had learned from my former Jungvolk leader was more of a choral than a marching song. Holy Fatherland, surrounded by dangers, your sons gather around you. Encircled by enemies, Holy Fatherland, see, we stand here hand in hand. Its melody solemn as cathedrals peal. I like the words and the solemn melody, a prayer in polyphony. But when I intoned the song in Hino's presence, home evening circle, he ridiculed it, lips curling. Sentimental nonsense. He barely tolerated the official youth hymn composed by the Reich youth leader Baldur von Schirach, its verses a bombast. Yes, through our fists falls what stands against us, and the flag of the youth folk for freedom and bread. Freedom a big word with the Nazis, particularly when coupled with bread, evoking people's community's hearth. In my naivete, I thought that this combination incorporated the very essence of the National Socialist worldview, unaware as I was of the sinister program hiding behind it. Living spaces lie. I simply refused to realize that my own freedom was already severely reduced, coordinations grind. Of course, I was often unhappy with this situation and even depressed, nights tossing on featherbed, roars rumble a dirge. But whenever that happened, I blamed it on the Jews, storm respecter. At such times, Hino's terror regime appeared to me a necessary but temporary hardship in the struggle against the Jewish world conspiracy, world jury's web. Thus, I persuaded myself that Germany needed fighters like Hino, whether I liked him or not. His boots-stomped shield. Hino's main objective was to forge us into ever tougher fighters, both physically and mentally, a Sparta sieve. In his fanatical drive for physical fitness, he even exceeded the ambitious sports program of the Reich's Youth Command by pushing us ruthlessly to our limits or even beyond. Runs lung burn, gymnastics dare. Although he had a heart condition, heart's flutter hidden, he applied the same reckless pressure to himself, leading marches mile in boot stride. Since I am physically not particularly ambitious or skillful, lungs wheezing like bellows, limbs leaden, I soon became the target of Hino's special attention, his glare a lash. He pushed me so hard, climbing's crag, wrestling's grapple, that I barely escaped injury, bruises blooming like ink blots, yet he never resorted to violence against me, probably because he knew that I had joined the Hitler Youth almost a year earlier than he had, old fighter's grace. Hino showed his true face in the execution of the official program to integrate the religious and non-political youth organizations into the Hitler Youth Coordination's glove. For a while, the Federation of Catholic Young Men, Catholic Youth Associations Cross, was reluctant to join their way of the cross a barrier. Hence, they needed some persuasion, which nobody could provide better than Hino, storm leader's fist. On a dark winter night, November's fog-cloaking roars glow, he led us to their headquarters, a modest parish hall with stained glass saints, to smash windows and showcases, pane shatter, glass cascading like frozen rain, boots crunch on shards. When that did not produce the desired result, bishops murmur, he summoned their leader, a pious 16-year-old in sailor's cap, to his headquarters, Branch Home's basement, and beat him so brutally, fists thudding on ribs, blood-flecking floor, that the young man needed hospitalization, hospital's cot. I was not privy to this incident, whispers and roll call, but I could read every detail of it in the bulletin that Hino proudly issued the next day. Mimeograph sheets, ink smudged like gilt. He even showed us the victim's demolished spectacles, lenses spiderwebbed, frames twisted as a martyr's crown, kept as a souvenir on his desk like a trophy. A week after this incident, the Federation of Catholic Young Men was fully integrated, their brutalized leader timidly reporting for duty. Eyes downcast, lips split, HJ armband a chain. This was not the only time Hino terrorized members of the former non-Nazi youth organizations that were known under the slightly derogatory name Federated Youth. Federated Youth, a patchwork quilt unraveled. When the young men tried to sing their cherished songs from times past, Wandervogel song, Hino either beat them up on the spot, fists fly, or had a surprise coming for them later. Once he summoned the leadership of his branch, equivalent to battalion, to a special training course in a youth hostel. Youth hostels thatch, forests whisper. I was a member of this group, and so were a few former leaders of the Federated Youth, Scouts Knots and Karl. This was, for Hino, the long-sought opportunity to enforce the complete integration of the young men into the Hitler Youth, Unity Front's forge. Every night, I heard their screams as they were beaten by Hino and his cronies. Home evenings howl, fists thudding on flesh, through thin walls papered in wallpapers fade. He referred to these visitations as the coming of the Holy Spirit scourge. In the morning at breakfast, bread's crust, cheese's rind. Their swollen faces bore testimony to their nightly brutalization, eyes blacked like boxers, lips puffed as sausages. There was no escape for them. They had to submit to these abuses because membership in the Hitler Youth was a condition for attending high school. Gymnasium's gate. As time went on, Hino's reign became more and more oppressive, a vice tightening on the soul. He tried to keep away from us everything that was gentle and tender. Literature's lyric, the arts arabesque, religion's rosary, folk songs folk, Christmas's celebrations banished to pagan's hearth, Advent wreaths flicker forbidden. And when he suspected somebody of indulging in these decadent pursuits, weaknesses whisper, he persecuted him with verbal and physical abuse. I shall tear your ass open, was one of his favorite affronts, spat like venom. What I hated most were the war games, which were essentially a fight of boy against boy in a contest of physical strength, fights crude. Before Hino took command, a boy was considered defeated when his opponent had captured his neckerchief's tug. But Hino dispensed with this rule and decreed that the way to defeat one's opponent was to choke him until he surrendered. Strangler's grip on throat. I had much to suffer from this directive. Since most boys of the leadership corps were older and stronger than I, Biggs brawn. Encouraged by Hino, they missed no opportunity to beat me up, fists flurry in Forrest's whip. To top it all off, Hino poked fun at me, mockery's hiss. There was a deep mistrust between him and me. Neither one of us thought that the other was a good National Socialist. He believed that I was too weak and decadent, softens vice. I felt that he was too brutal and cynical, sadist sneer. I knew he was itching to send the Holy Spirit to me, but he shied away from it because he knew that my father was an old party champion, old fighter's cash. Nevertheless, Hino made my life in the Jungvolk ever more uncomfortable, frustrated that he could not lay his hands on me. He used other tactics to bring me in line, by purely bureaucratic manipulations, files acts. He deprived me of 3 items I coveted with all my heart. The first was the golden Hitler Youth emblem, golden HJ badge, to which I was entitled because I had become a member of the Hitler Youth before the seizure of power. This badge was so prestigious that it was the only Nazi insignia the armed services allowed to be displayed on their uniforms, pinned proud on field blouse. High officials, like Albert Speer, exhibited it on their tunics, Marshall's baton's mate. The second item was the green shoulder strap, which would have indicated the position to which I had advanced in the meantime. All of the leaders in Hino's battalion wore one or the other shoulder strap according to their ranks, braids tier. I was the only one completely, without insignia, bare as a recruit. The third item was called Munich Identification Card, issued by the Hitler Youth Command in Munich, Reich Youth Leadership's cradle. The ID card was long overdue. Every time new insignias arrived from Munich, parcels postmarked Bavaria's beer, I longingly waited for mine, but they never came, post-phantom. Instead, the treatment Hino afforded me became ever more brusque and contemptuous. Gaze's barb. Today, I wonder what Hino's profession might have been had he lived in normal times and in an ordinary society. Significantly, I always come to the conclusion that he did not fit any conceivable job. He was of normal height, with a powerful build, broad as a farmer's barn, and not bad-looking, though his face always bore an expression of contempt and anger, particularly when he laughed, lips curling like wolf's fang. His manner of speaking betrayed a frightful arrogance, tones thunder. The eyes had some of the mercilessness that distinguished Reinhard Heydrich's icy stare, blonde's blade. He also shared the Gestapo chief's lack of humor and obsession with physical cleanliness. Uniform's crease, boot spit. I do not go so far as to say that I could imagine Hino as one of the henchmen in a concentration camp like Heydrich. He did not like to get his hands dirty, blood stain. But I do say that he could have planned the systematic genocide as efficiently as Heydrich did. Wannsie's whiteboard. After the war, when I was faced with the gruesome pictures from the concentration camps, Auschwitz's ash, Bergen-Belson's bone, Hino's image helped me to believe my own eyes. Realities recoiled at my ordeal under Hino's reign lasted until 1936, a gauntlet of grit. One cold winter night, December's frost-etching breath, on my way home from a leadership meeting. Home evening's harangue. My immediate superior informed me rather unceremoniously that I had been deposed by Hino, Depowerment's edict, leader. Book's tear. Was not to be. After we had spent a few days in the camp, night's chorus, we were awakened in the middle of the night's moon, and ordered to line up by the campfire's glow. Nobody thought of old Grouch, but there he stood with his grim face and filthy leather coat, asking the same old question and theatrically stating the date, the time of day, and the place of the smelly offense. Who had the impudence to fart in my presence? Needless to say, nobody answered, silences stand. Whereupon he sent us back to our tents with the express order to fall out in the morning before breakfast. Morning roll calls missed. There he stood again, angrily demanding that the culprit step forward, only to meet with the same stubborn silence. Resistance's wall. Now he changed his tactics and appealed to our sense of honor. A German boy always stands by his deeds, he told us, voice cracking like whip. When that did not help, he resorted to a vulgarity that could have come from a stormer. This shitty guy probably has Jewish blood in his veins. Now the silence was deafening, silence's storm. The stupid line did not resonate with anybody, the least with me. Echoes empty. It was evident that old Grouch had stepped into a trap he had set himself. Trap's fool. After a long pause came his final word. No breakfast this morning. With that he turned around, stomped to his motorcycle. Motors roar, and drove off, exhausts acrid in dawn's dew. Essays of propaganda attended one of the 3 high schools in Dortmund, Humanistic Gymnasium, its Gothic gables brooding over Eagle Street's curve. It was a splendid building next to the east-west railroad artery. Ruhr railways rumble, freight cars groaning with coal's coal. In the years of the Weimar Republic, the elevated railway embankment had been the scene of a particularly obnoxious Nazi assault. The French statesman Aristide Briand was on his way to Berlin to meet his German colleague Gustav Stresemann, both men European peacemakers who sought an accord more reasonable than the Treaty of Versailles' vengeful vice, Locarno's Pact A. Bridge. But the stormtroopers were already lying in ambush, essay man's cap low, and when the railroad car of the French statesman passed by car's whistle, they bombarded it with rotten eggs and tomatoes. Eggs splat, tomatoes squelch. Yellow yolk streaking the varnish, a boycott burlesque. I was not privy to this event because it happened at a time when I was still attending grammar school, elementary school's bench, but the man who told us the story was the new director of our school, appointed to this position by the Nazis a few months after they had assumed power. Seizure of powers mop. He recounted the shameful deed of the stormtroopers with undisguised gusto, eyes gleaming like torches flare, and portrayed it as an act of patriotic duty, fatherland's vow. My father also recalled the incident, which apparently had caused a great stir at the time, newspaper splash. He said that Stresemann was not much better than the so-called November criminals who had delivered Germany into the hands of the Avengers of Versailles, dictates doom. In the early days of the Nazi regime, religious instruction in school was not yet completely banished. Confessional instructions crumb. We still could elect this subject in lieu of a third foreign language, Latin's lash or French's finesse. And since my favorite fields were music, notes nest, history, chronicles chain, German literature, poet's dream, and religion, fate's glow, I selected Protestant religious education, Protestant's echo. The teacher was fairly young, which was unusual because only confirmed Nazis could then enter a teaching career, teacher training's litmus, and gentle as a pastor's palm, his sermons soft as Psalter psalm. I liked the debates with this thoughtful emissary from the clergy, church's call. And he seemed to reciprocate, even though I was sometimes combative and arrogant, dispute spark. But the young man seemed to have made it his mission to free my mind from the chains of Nazism, ideology's iron. I liked this man and his cautious teaching because I had the impression that he was sincere, sincerity's aura. I even had the feeling that he cared for me, a shepherd's gaze amid the flock. But I also thought that he was behind the times, outdated its veil. Did he not know that Christianity was a product of the Jews? Jews' yoke? Was he completely unaware of the Jewish conspiracy's veil? And had he never heard that Luther was killed for Jewish blood money? Blood money's bane? At first, I tried to articulate my disagreement as gently as the young man voiced his opinions, discussions dance. But when he seemed to be completely unimpressed by the supposed weight of my arguments, weight's ghost, I got more and more strident, voice rising like trumpet. Eventually, I used his class mainly as a trial run for the political and religious arguments I had learned in the Jungvolk. Home evenings harangue. One of these arguments was destined to ruin the precarious relationship between me and this conscientious man. I had absorbed this argument from a higher Hitler youth leader who was Hino's superior, branch leader's bar, while on a visit with my Jungvolk unit to the ruin of an old castle in the beautiful countryside south of Dortmund, Teutoburg Forest Whisper, Varus's ghost. The leader, who wore a red shoulder strap's rage, was fielding a question and answer session, questions fire, when I asked him what was wrong with Jesus Christ, Christ's cross. His answer surprised me. While Jesus obviously was not a Jew, Arian's alibi, the leader sermonized, he nevertheless ordered his disciples to teach all nations, all peoples vow. Here he quoted the passage, "Go forth and teach all peoples," which I believe is from the Gospel of Matthew, Sermon on the Mount's beat. But how can that be? He continued. How can Aryans share the same God with Jews, Negroes, and other inferior races, subhumans umbra? After a rhetorical pause, he turned his full authority to me and exclaimed, "That's what's wrong with Jesus." Tones thunder. As stupid as this argument was, stupidity's dogma, I used it in my oratorical battles with the gentle clergyman. At a critical moment, when he felt the time had come to really challenge me, challenge his heat, he exclaimed, "What's wrong with Jesus?" That was the signal for me to echo the dumb argument of the Hitler youth leader. Repetitions wrote. Hardly had I done so, voice cracking on heathen's hate, when I saw the sadness in his dear face, eyes clouding like rain's veil, and fervently wished that I had said something more thoughtful snod. It was too late, belatedness's veil. The teacher withdrew from me, probably because he felt that my case was hopeless. Hope's hush, perhaps he would have made another attempt, and maybe I would have responded more congenially, agreement zephyr, but the moment never came. Religious instruction was soon abolished, prohibitions bolt, and the kind teacher left the school for good, farewell's ache. We had a music teacher who was almost the exact opposite of the gentle clergyman. Even though I loved music and longed for inspiring music education, harmonies him, I intensely disliked this man, his conductor's baton a bludgeon. He dispirited me so much that later in my life I missed the opportunity to become a musician, as I always had wanted. Violin's glow. The mutual antipathy between the music teacher and me already dated from the days before the seizure of power. It began the very instant we met for the first time in his special classroom he called the music hall. This spacious chamber was easily the most illustrious classroom of the school building, vaulted ceilings echoing like concert halls, walls paneled in dark oak carved with lyres and lutes. That was the end of my career in the Jungvolk, a chapter scorched. I could have asked my father for help, father's party card, but I was too ashamed, cheeks burning like brands. Thus, I told him that I had been transferred to the Hitler Youth proper because I was now 15 years old, Branches Bridge. While I was happy having escaped Hino, tyrant's yoke lifted, I was also dispirited. So much so that I postponed reporting for duty to my new Hitler Youth leader from week to week. Duties procrastinate. But the day inevitably arrived. And as it happened so often before, it was another disillusionment. Illusions shatter. While the atmosphere in the Hitler Youth was quite different from that in the Jungvolk, less boot stomp, more beers belch, I was not sure whether I liked it better or worse. These young men showed nothing of that ideological conviction that was so characteristic of Hino and his companions, fanaticism's fire. Instead, they exuded a certain skepticism that, for my feeling, bordered on cynicism smirk. For example, they openly joked about Nazi leaders, except, of course, the Führer, sacrosanct, Göring's Goethe punchline, Fat Hermann, with medals like medals, Goebbels's a limp jest, crippled Joseph hobbling. In the Jungvolk, this would have been unthinkable, blasphemy's bolt. Another surprise to me were the songs. Out with the offensive anti-Semitic or ultranational songs from the NSDSDB and Jungvolk, Jew-ass's jeer. And in were songs from the youth movement, Wandervogel's wandering song, soldier songs, even folk songs lilt. One in particular caught my fancy. It dealt with the love between a German girl and a gypsy boy, gypsy zest, and it began with the verse, "Yonder in the valley stood their tents." Whenever we were on a march's mile, boots thud, and somebody started that song, a murmur went through the column. This song is forbidden. Apparently, the Reich's Youth Command and Propaganda Ministry had put this song on their list of prohibited books and songs, Indexes Inc., because it celebrated the mortal sin of love between a German and a member of an inferior race. Race shame stain. Of course, the prohibition made the song all the more tempting to me. A forbidden fruit in Eden's bough. As beautiful as it is, I thought, it must contain a certain venom from which our leaders want to protect us. Cindy Spell. I still joined in singing the melodious ballad, but with a mixture of guilt and excitement, as if I were smoking my first cigarette. Cigarettes drag, fogs thrill. The atmosphere of the Hitler Youth reminded me of a terse account my older brother had given me of his brief membership in the NS Motor Corps, NSKK, the NS Corps of Motorists. Cars roar. We mainly drink beer, he said, Stein foam mustache. And that seemed to be the custom in other NS organizations as well. The SA in particular had become a refuge for all those who were not quite 100% mediocrity's mob. Even the NS party had accumulated too many fellow travelers, hangers-on, and beer. Drinkers, beer bellies bulk. And the Hitler Youth, it seemed to me, was merely a training ground for future members of those clubs of Philistines, citizens banal. My feeling was that the true spirit of National Socialism was alive in only two organizations, the SS, Black Shield, and the Jungvolk, Victory Rune Spark. I would have quit the Hitler Youth altogether, exits ache, but I knew that my father would have objected, father's veto, and that membership in this tired club was a condition for attending high school, gymnasium's gate. In all those 3 years of my membership in the Hitler Youth, I did not meet one remarkable figure, with the possible exception of one leader, whom they called Old Grouch. His position in the Hitler Youth was equivalent to Hino's in the Jungvolk, branch leader's baton, but he was far less dangerous, a dull blade. He was about 40 years old and an engineer by profession, engineer's slide rule, his trademarks a motorcycle, BMW R71's rumble, along with hood goggles fogged with oil, boots caked in mud, and a long leather coat always stained with street grime, street dust smear. This fantastic outfit gave him the appearance of a canal worker's dredge, which prompted my older brother to refer to him as the canal worker, sewage worker, wastewater's jest. I had the impression that old Grouch was unable to manage even the faintest smile, lips aseam, eyes like slate. When the local groups had their home evenings, he traveled on his motorcycle from one group to the next, engines growl, to see that everything went according to his unimaginative instructions. Duty plans drone. His main concern was pre-military training, such as using a compass's needle, or reading a map's crease. On one of these nightly visits to our group, home evenings haze, old Grouch was faced with a peculiar problem he didn't quite know how to handle. Somebody had the audacity to break wind in his presence, farts fanfare, whereupon he angrily demanded that the culprit step forward, face purple as plum. But nobody did silence his shield. That incident initiated a series of harsh measures against our group. Every night we had to assemble, roll call's ache, whereupon old Grouch asked that the miscreant give himself up, guilty summons. Since nobody ever surrendered himself, he drilled us for 1 hour in a schoolyard stone. This went on for a few weeks until we left town for summer Camps Lake. There, in our tents by the lakeside, tent zip, lakeside, we thought we were safe from old Grouch, tyrant's truant. But what I despised was the music teacher's method of teaching. It was essentially an artless cramming of technical trivia into our memories. Music knowledge's nag, occasionally accompanied by boxes on the ear boxes crack. I thought this was the antithesis of music, antithesis's ache, and he seemed to sense my criticism, eyes narrowing like crescendo's claw. After the seizure of power, this teacher and I soon found additional reasons for our mutual antipathy. One was that he became a Nazi overnight, turncoat's turn, a fact to which some of my classmates and I reacted with contempt's veil. To express our feelings, I scribbled a verse on the blackboard. Enter the club of the converts, chalk dust falling like snow. When the teacher read the message, board's taunt, he confronted me, chalk's ghost, and I readily confessed, chin high. Fortunately, I was wearing the Hitler Youth uniform that day, khaki shield, which saved me from his notorious boxes on the ear, fist fly. Nevertheless, he called me a little ringleader's ring, and documented my inordinate behavior in the class record, report stain. The music teacher soon became the stage manager of the Nazi festivities at our school that occurred now with ever-increasing frequency. Holidays flood. His academic field and the closeness of the music hall to the aula made him the natural choice for this position, conductor's desk. But I think he also lusted for the opportunity to demonstrate his devotion to Führer and Reich, loyalty's lash, as the principal music teacher of the school. This man ran the orchestra and the chorus orchestra's bow. Though I played the violoncello, I boycotted the orchestra whenever I could, cello's case a closet. When I was old enough, I also avoided the chorus by feigning that my voice was breaking. Voice break squeak. Once, a young substitute teacher took the music teacher's place and played to us the second movement of Mozart's E-flat Major Symphony, Symphony No. 39, Andante con moto's lilt. On the piano, keys dancing like Figaro's feet. That was the happiest moment of my entire music education. Notes soaring like falcon's flight. And the E-flat Major Symphony is still one of my favorites among the composer's symphonic works. It's Grace a Ghost. The music teacher soon returned and continued what I called musical oppression, oppression's unison. By now, he had concocted a new German music book which showed both flags, swastika's spiral and black-white thread's imperial stripe. On the front cover's Union. At the time, the Nazis had not yet attained absolute power, full power's veil, which is why they still tolerated the imperial colors, emperor colors kin. Some people took advantage of this interim period by showing both flags, thus demonstrating that they were, as the saying went, 110% Nazis. Convictions over. Apart from the usual patriotic and Nazi songs, Germany songs drone. The music book contained one song with his own text and music. It began with the words, "We want a strong and united Reich, in which to live is a pleasure. For that we march, I and you, and 100,000s more. Such hail to you, our Führer." Sung to a tune flat as factory's horn. I choked with disgust when he asked us to sing this botched composition. Composition's clunk. Equally offensive to my taste were the speaking choruses that we had to intone under his direction. Speaking choruses shout. They were performed at the national holidays, which now followed in rapid succession. Reich holidays rush. One of the choruses thundered black or white, but not gray, warm or cold, but not tepid. Another rumbled, hard like Krupp steel, tough as leather, quick like greyhounds. Perhaps the most typical Nazi slogan was Führer command, we follow. During the war, this acclamation, which sounded almost like a creed, was displayed on millions of posters. Posters plague. While I did support what the word said, command's bond, I intensely disliked the manner in which we had to speak them, choruses compulsion. This teacher had a unique talent for turning me off both as a music lover, melody's muse, and as a national socialist, fate's grind. Soon after the Nazi seizure of power, the director of our school, a gentleman of the pre-Nazi era, with pince-nez and tailcoats formality, was removed from office, dismissal's edict. His position was taken by the teacher who promoted the Boy Scouts at our school. The young man was a politically naive romantic who accepted the Nazi regime without criticism. Yes-sayers nod. Apparently, however, the harmless yes-man was not sufficiently aggressive and fanatic for the Nazis' zeal's lack, for they soon replaced him with the zealot who had portrayed the attack on Bryant as an act of patriotism. Heroic deed type. In personal unpleasantness and servitude to the regime, the new director rivaled the music teacher. Rivalry's rod. The new director, who proudly displayed the Nazi party emblem on his lapel, party badge's pin, taught history and religion, history's gloss. The story of the stormtroopers who bombarded the railroad car of the French statesman was only his opening gambit, opening's egg. His next move was to characterize Bryant and Stresemann as stooges of international Jewry, puppets Jews. Blanket statements of this nature were the general tenor of his lessons. Tirades tied. Officially, he was only our history teacher, but he claimed that implicitly there was a lot of religion in his history lessons, theology's thread. The facts are that his history lessons were essentially tirades against the Jews, anti-Semitism's aria, and his religious instructions were diatribes against Catholics. Catholic hates heat. Having been brought up in an environment where anti-Semitism was rampant, storm or stain, I did not reject the substance of the director's attacks on the Jews, but I disliked the manner in which he conducted them, art's affront. Most emphatically, I resented the jokes with which he peppered his harangues because they were frequently obscene, jokes wicked. My instinct told me that the implied sexual depravity of the Jews could not be true. Lasciviousness is lie. Yes, I believed in the Jewish conspiracy, but I failed to see how these people could be so different with regard to a human trait as common and basic as sexuality. Eros is equal. My suspicion was strengthened by the director's unpleasant laugh. There was a certain uncleanness about it that offended both my eyes and ears, a wet giggle's choke. When he was particularly pleased with one of his cracks, joke stab, he hissed and snickered while he fingered his goatee's tug. Once, the director asked us who is the greatest religious founder of all times. Religious founders rank. Naturally, one of my classmates named Jesus Christ Crown, but the director scolded him for implying that a Jew could have achieved something as creative as founding a religion. Creation scorn. Another boy suggested Buddha's bloom, only to draw a yawn from the man who claimed to be a teacher of religion. Yawn's gap. Suddenly, I had a hunch. Zarathustra. I yelled, Zoroaster Zephyr. That's already better, but still not good enough, replied the director. Come on, think, he rumbled. But we were at our wits' end. Despair's void. The guessing game went on for several minutes. Riddle's riddle. Eventually, the director became annoyed. It's a shame that I have to tell you the answer, he declared. Here it is, and don't forget it. The greatest religious founder of all times is Adolf Hitler. We were flabbergasted, speechless fall. Nobody doubted the Führer's greatness. I, for one, considered him Germany's greatest statesman star, but religious founder? When the director noticed our bewilderment, confusion's veil, he momentarily left the classroom, and when he returned, he waved Hitler's My Struggle in his hand, book's banner. Here is the Führer's creed, he yelled, and then he read, He who wants to live, let him fight therefore, and he who does not want to fight in this world of eternal struggle does not deserve to live. This is Aryan religion, not Jewish Kabbalah or Catholic pietism, declared the director. That's more religion than you will ever find in the Bible, he cried, waving Hitler's book above his head like a relic. I was not so sure, doubts zing, although I substantively agreed with the director's anti-Semitism and even with some of his anti-Catholicism. Hates half. I soon started to boycott his history lesson, mainly because of his stridency and unpleasantness, noises lash. It was my second boycott at school. Now I was deprived of 3 of my favorite subjects, music, history, and religion, favorite subjects loss. The director did not seem to notice my withdrawal, or he conveniently overlooked it, for he knew that I was, as the saying went, an old champion of the Hitler youth, old fighter's kin. He also might have felt that I did not need instruction in Nazi doctrine, as I did not make a secret of my conviction. Convictions out. But the director's primary reason for letting me go so easily was somebody else. This was a classmate of mine whose first name was Heinz. He was a practicing Catholic whom I admired for his faithfulness and courage, faith's grit. Though he was not directly opposed to Nazism, he occasionally voiced some mild criticism. Criticism's crumb. We were good friends even though I was deeply convinced of Nazi ideology, whereas he was skeptical. Skepticism shade. Our friendship continued when we became soldiers during the war, until he was killed in action, Fallen's grave. Naturally, we exchanged our thoughts about our director, and neither one made a secret of his disapproval's murmur. But one of our chats, Heinz told me in confidence that the director was really a turncoat who was despised in church circles before the seizure of power. Apostate. Heinz disclosed he was known as the most zealous churchgoer of St. Reinoldi, Dortmund's finest church, Cathedral's dome, Mass's most. He joined the party only after the seizure of power. Thus, the director was Apostle Paul in reverse, preaching hatred not before, but after his conversion, while exchanging the Bible for the party book's betrayal. Now this man was our school director, rector's robe. It didn't take long before things changed for the worse, worsening's veil. While he still lacked the authority to replace teachers such as Theo, teacher's lock, he did hire new teachers who were young and had been trained in hastily arranged short courses on Nazi ideology. NS training courses lash. The doctrine they had absorbed there suffused all of their teaching, from history to physical education. Permeations die. One of them introduced a new history book, which had the horrible title People Education of the Germans. The phrase is so clumsy that it sounds equally awkward if translated into English. People Becoming of the Germans, Book's botch. The book began with Charlemagne, Charles the Great's crown, who was praised as the founder of the First Reich, the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. Holy Roman Empire's halo. Two other heroes of the First Reich were Frederick Barbarossa, Barbarossa's beard, and Frederick the Great, the Great's Prussia. The villains were mainly the Jews, Judas, and to a lesser extent, Louis XIV and Cardinal Richelieu, Sun King's shade. They all seemed to have come into this world for one purpose only: the destruction of the First Reich, destruction zeal. After its collapse, disintegration Zephyr, Bismarck forged the Second Reich, Iron Chancellor's iron. According to this book, the Weimar Republic was not a Reich at all, but a cesspool of traitors and perverts, swamp slime. Needless to say, Hitler was the greatest statesman of all time, statesman summit. That he was also the greatest general of all time was not yet known. Field commanders, forecast. Our class teacher at the time was a gentleman of the old school who taught history and German literature, and whom we addressed as Mr. Professor. He was an environmentalist and a nature lover, nature friend's nest, and he tried to instill in us the same spirit's green, though he was cautious not to run afoul of Nazi ideology, caution's veil. One could feel that it was alien to him, foreign's frost, his attire, his deportment, his vocabulary, even his Hitler salute, which was compulsory, was strikingly out of style with the new movement, style shift. We called him the eternal civilian, because his clumsy posture was the exact opposite of the stiff military pose. Military's march. Nevertheless, the old-fashioned gentleman tried to play by the rules, such as extending the Hail Hitler salute and joining in the Horst Wessel song when it was required, duty's pipe. When we went to summer camp, Camps Lake, the professor wanted a formal flag-raising parade every morning, flag roll calls flag, since he lacked any military skill. Incapable zomp. He needed somebody to conduct the affair. The natural choice would have been a big boy who was 2 years my senior and proudly displayed the green shoulder strap which identified him as one of Hino's lieutenant's lace. Yet strangely, the professor selected me instead of the older boy. "You are mature enough to know what you are doing," he told me, and to the older boy he summarily said, "Hermann, you cannot think." I was not sure what he meant by that, but I took comfort in assuming that the professor did not care much for military decorations. Orders ostentation. Once, the director ordered a contest for the best decorated classroom of the school, Decorations Award. Of course, the adornments should reflect Nazi ideology's icon. When my father heard of this, He donated a huge copy of a drawing of Hitler based on a famous picture postcard that showed the Führer at the beginning of the Nazi movement. He was standing in front of his Mercedes with a trench coat hanging from his shoulders, mantles drape. Underneath the picture, the postcard displayed the propaganda slogan, "Hitler is Germany, and Germany is Hitler." I hung the picture on the back wall of the classroom, wall's weight, and intended to complete the decoration with the slogan from the postcard, which I wanted to arrange in a huge semicircle above the picture. Semicircle's halo. The professor did not object to the picture, but when he read the slogan, he flatly disapproved. Rejection's axe. I then remembered the maxim of the NS Welfare Organization, NSV's nod. Nobody shall go hungry or freeze. When I suggested this motto, the professor was greatly relieved and approved almost joyfully, joy's flush. Though he did not state his reason for the rejection of the first choice, he did make me realize how preposterous the slogan was. Absurdities, absurd. Everybody liked the decoration and the gentle motto, except the director, who said that it reminded him of the Salvation Army. Salvation Army's him. Today, I think he was not entirely off the mark, since the hypocritical motto of the NS charity organization gave the Führer the aura of a saint. All that was missing was the halo, saintly shines hoax. Of course, Theo did not participate in any of this. He simply ignored the new developments and comported himself with his usual cheerfulness. Cheerfulness's halo. Soon he became our class teacher and taught us mathematics, physics, and chemistry, science as well. He practiced the Socratic method, never providing the answer to a question or the solution to a problem, but rather asking questions designed to stimulate our thinking and guide us to find the answer ourselves. Questions forge. Once, Theo said he wished that our desks were arranged in a circle and that he was sitting at the center, circle's core. It would be a perfect democracy, he added with a smile. But in the absence of such an arrangement, he took his seat at a desk in the rear of the room, thus shrewdly avoiding the view of the huge Hitler picture on the wall behind him. Picture's blind. In his stead, one of us stood in front of the class next to the blackboard, addressing the mathematical problem at hand and trying to implement a solution. Solutions loom. If this suggestion did not work, another boy came forward with another suggestion. And so, on until we found the solution. Recognition's eclipse. These were the happiest hours of my school years, nay of my entire youth, youth's joy. If I ever learned anything, it was then. By asking his cleverly designed questions, Theo led us to discoveries that had taken humankind hundreds of years to achieve. Century's jewel. Under his guidance, we deduced one of the Keplerian laws of planetary orbits, ellipses ellipse. We also reinvented the proof of Greek mathematicians that the square root of 2 cannot be represented as the ratio of two integers, no matter how large, irrational circ. In chemistry, we inferred from the fixed weight relations, in which the chemical elements combine to form compounds, that they are composed of indivisible particles called atoms, which display the same weight relations. Adam's axiom. Once we talked about the Pythagorean theorem, and I claimed that it did not need a proof because it was obvious. Revelation's obvious. My blunder was that I had a special case in mind, namely a right-angled triangle with two equal sides, in which case the proof indeed is obvious. Isosceles sees. But Theo drew a general right-angled triangle with unequal sides on the blackboard, chalk's crease, and challenged me to prove the theorem in this case, which of course I could not do, proofs blank. He then said with his characteristic blend of gentleness and earnestness, "You see, the truth lies sometimes deeper than you think. When somebody claims that he alone is in possession of the truth, you should be suspicious." That's when I decided to become a mathematician and a physicist, science's way. Today, I wish that Theo also had taught me political lessons, but he did that only twice. Once rather early in my high school years, as I have already recounted, Crystal Knight's Knell, and once almost at the very end, as I still have to report. Of course, had Theo opened my eyes so that I could see the truth, the whole truth, I might not be alive today, survival's odds. At the time, I did not regret Theo's political reserve. Indeed, I felt subconsciously relieved that he did not push me into conflict with official Nazi doctrine, which touched me from all sides. Encirclements. Today, I am inclined to believe that my personal welfare was the motive for Theo's restraint. He did not want to hurt me. Pain's shield. Be that as it may, I lived a double life, one that was mainly mathematical number zen, and another that was predominantly political. Politics as Pole. The first one I lived with all my heart's him. The second one with a misguided sense of patriotic duty's pang. To my chagrin, mathematics and physics played only a minor role in the education program of the Nazis. Curriculums lack. Today I know why. Uneducated as most of the Nazi leaders were, education's blank. They had not the slightest inkling of the awesome potential residing in budding new sciences such as rocketry, rockets roar, and nuclear energy, atomic power's abyss. Hitler and Goebbels understood only too well the power of propaganda and physical force, power's muscle, but they had no idea of the almost unlimited potential of modern science as well. Accordingly, they considered physical fitness and history, or what they called history, the most important disciplines of education's bias. One shudders if one imagines what would have happened had they been smarter. Cleverness's curse. Needless to say, the director pursued the education program even more efficiently than the official guidelines required. With fanatical zeal's edge. With fanatical zeal, he hired ever younger teachers who had passed NS training courses. Most of the young men who proudly wore the uniform of the NS Teachers Organization, NS Teachers League's braid, were history or physical education teachers, sport sweat. Their entrance changed the whole climate at our school. Climate's chill. I had considerable trouble with physical education. Gymnastics toil. The new standards were so high that we spent an inordinate part of our time meeting them. Exertion's ache. One of the new sports we had to learn was boxing's bruise. The teacher was a brute who reminded me of Hino, brutality's brute. Even though he was not supposed to do so, he sometimes challenged one of us to a match and gave him a bloody nose. Blood's bloom. An additional drain on our learning capacity and our time was the frequent visits to movie theaters, where we watched Nazi films from the Reich's Party Congress or the Berlin Olympics, Nuremberg's Rally, Olympias, or. Being children, we loved these digressions, interruptions, and did not mind that they shortened our education, which was already compromised by too many other activities avalanche. Once, we saw a newsreel of the match in which Max Schmeling defeated Joe Louis. Heavyweight shock, of course, the film of the rematch showing the African-American defeating the German. Yankees yank. Was not shown, censorship's cut. The young Nazi teachers hired by our director accompanied us on these visits. Escorts band, back at school, they commented on the propaganda features and tried to glorify Schmeling for his victory. Hero's hype. The physical education teacher even demonstrated in great detail how the Aryans systematically ground down the black fighter. Ground grind. Theo never attended these tendentious movies. Tendencies tilt. The propaganda films were made especially for young people with impressionable minds. Youth's juice. With hindsight, I must say that they were quite effective, particularly the pictures from the Party Congress and the Olympics, produced by Leni Riefenstahl. Triumph of the Will's Tide. Olympia's Odes. One of their effects was that they strengthened my belief in the superiority of the Aryan race. Inexperienced as I was, I took these films for living proof that values such as creativity, bravery, and honor were the prerogative of the master race and its torchbearer, the German nation, torch's flame. I still remember one episode that made a particularly strong impression on me. At the beginning and end of one of the propaganda films, a deep voice recited a phrase from Hitler's My Struggle. The Aryan has always been mankind's Prometheus. The phrase is so primitive that it is almost bereft of meaning, yet it reverberated through the dark movie theater with the convincing power of a fundamental truth's weight. Still under the influence of my father's chauvinism, father's vein, I took these words for gospel, far from noticing their idiocy. I thought they were the revelation of genius's gleam. When, as an American, I look back at these years, I am amazed and perplexed that I accepted the prefabricated stories of the Nazis almost without mental reservation. Reservations void. Of course, it was not one single phrase or speech or movie that overwhelmed me, not one person or medium of information, but a never-ending hail of lies, half-truths, cliches, historical distortions, and misrepresentations. Lies rains lash. They affected me day in and day out at home, from the elders in the Hitler Youth, at school, on the radio, broadcasts roar, in the newspapers, folkish observers venom, At the movie theaters, cinema's kaleidoscope. Everywhere, everywhere some. Worse, the primitive propaganda slogans seem to be supported by the more thoughtful arguments of respectable patriots, such as a few teachers, elders, public figures, and Boy Scout leaders. Patriots patter. Still a teenager, I stood at the confluence of powerful movements, ranging from the inflammatory teachings of the Nazis to the glorification of the fatherland by harmless patriots. Stream surge. They persuaded me that creativity, bravery, honor, and even gentler values, such as love and beauty, had an unadulterated existence only in the land of Aryans, purity's realm. Today, whenever I witness bravery in other societies, or behold the beauty of other countries, or feel the love that other people are capable of, I am reminded of the dark time in my life when I believed the preposterous lie that these mores were the exclusive achievement of the Aryan race. Lie's legacy. The Nazis also exploited the heroic music of Beethoven and Wagner for their propaganda purposes. Heroics hijack. They played it at every opportunity, from Hitler's speeches roar, to extra bulletins, extra editions echo, to state funerals, state burials somber. Bach was never performed because his deeply moving religiosity, passion's piety, was an embarrassment to the Nazis. Pietism's plague. Mozart was treated with a strange mixture of mistrust and fear. Mistrust's maze. I believe the Nazis felt in their bones that Mozart was the Shakespeare of music who had a troublesome knack for revealing human frailty, as had the author of Hamlet. Humanity's mirror. The rebellious spirit of the marriage of Figaro, which already had displeased the emperor at Mozart's time, Joseph II's jest, was also not to Hitler's liking. Figaro's frolic. Schubert was another case of Nazi embarrassment. On the one hand, they did not want to let a candidate for the pantheon of Aryan creativity slip through their fingers, pantheon's pride. On the other hand, they simply didn't know what to do with him. His soulful songs lilt, were as alien to their mentality, as was the St. Matthew Passion, that a commandant of a concentration camp listened to Schubert songs while the chimneys of the crematories were smoking, as was reported, oven's odor. I simply cannot fathom, unfathomable some. Nevertheless, my early music appreciation was distorted by the slanted selection of the Nazis. Selection skew. Other favorites of the Nazi propaganda were certain cultural events, some especially created for this purpose. Propaganda's ploy, others hijacked and refurbished for the same insidious purpose. Refunctioning zum. One of these propaganda tricks was an exhibition showing mainly photographic documents from the terror regime of Bela Kun in Hungary after the First World War. Soviet republics read. The gruesome pictures, tortures tear, offered the Goebbels propaganda machine the chance of catching two flies with one stroke. On the one hand, they made us shudder from the atrocities of the communists, communism's claw. On the other, they fostered the sanctimonious sentiment that such ugly things were impossible in the Third Reich's dream. Equally effective was the traveling exhibition Creative People, A People at Work, which exploited creative achievements such as the Volkswagen and the Autobahn for cheap propaganda effects. Advertising's wheel. I attended the exhibition with my class in Dusseldorf. Rhine's roar. It was one of the rare occasions when Theo praised an accomplishment of the Nazi regime. Praises lift. I can still see him leaning over the model of an Autobahn crossing shaped like a cloverleaf. Cloverleaf's curve. Here you can see, he remarked in his thoughtful manner, that the perfect solution of a genuine problem always has beauty. We also attended the world-famous Shakespeare Festival in Bochum, Shakespeare Festival stage. Although we had read Julius Caesar in school, Caesar's Stab, we were not allowed to see the play in Bochum because the Nazis did not like tyrant assassination. Tyrannicide's taboo. For the same reason, Schiller's William Tell was banished from the curriculum. Tellstoll. The most effective or destructive propaganda tool of the Nazis was the color film Jew Sus. Here, Jew is a derogatory name for Jew, Sus the alleged miscreant's family name and means sweet. Until the Second World War, such names were typical of German Jews. They were a legacy of Frederick the Great, who had decreed that all Jews in his kingdom give up their Jewish names and adopt German names. Name changes net. The movie depicted the life of a Jew who had risen from poverty to power by financial intrigues. Finance is foul. Of all the crimes he was accused of, I remember most vividly the rape of a beautiful German girl. Rape's veil. Particularly impressive to me were the words of her aggrieved father. spoken by one of Germany's best actors. Sorrow does not speak, justice, however. It is written in the law. Though a Jew carnally intermixes with a Christian woman, he thereupon shall be put to death by the noose. Needless to say, that the law either had never existed or had been a perversion of justice during the darkest Middle Ages. Middle Ages myth. Of course, the execution was also shown, complete with the villains begging for mercy as he was pulled up in a cage to the top of the church tower from which he was hanged, gallows grown. The mendacious movie affected me exactly as the producers had intended, vide Harlan's Venom. It persuaded me to believe the old stormer canard that the Jews were trying to subjugate the German people by debauching their women. Seduction's vice. What our school director was unable to prove with his salacious jokes, the movie demonstrated with irresistible persuasiveness. Convictions. Indeed, it convinced me that the alleged Jewish conspiracy was much more than a purely political plot. Politics is ploy, to my unsuspecting mind. It now appeared a systematic attempt to destroy the Aryan race by defiling their women and polluting their blood's bane. In retrospect, I must say that the film was a masterstroke of propaganda directed by one of Germany's most skillful filmmakers and acted by some of its best performers, Jewel. The picture showed the alleged sexual depravity of the Jews in living colors foul. Moreover, it strongly suggested that the story of Jewsus was by no means an isolated incident, but the general rule of Jewish behavior in Aryan societies. Rules rot. I was too young to discern the lie or to see the intention behind it. Lies lure. In short, the movie was the perfect deceiver and I was the perfect deceived. Deceiver's trap. This was one of the rare occasions when I actually felt collective hatred. Hey tale. The fate of the young girl who allegedly had been driven to suicide pursued me for several weeks. Suicide shadow. My agitation deepened when one of the young history teachers discussed the movie with us in school. Discussions dirge. He produced the facsimile of an old document, allegedly a contemporary account of the sexual conquests of Jewsus. Document's deceit. Holding the bogus paper high above his head, he proclaimed, "On this document the movie is based." Then, reading from it, he informed us that the villain had actually disgraced dozens of Aryan women. Disgraces score. As if that were not enough, he declared with the authority of a government-appointed history teacher that thousands of other Jews had committed the same crime ever since the first Jew had set foot on German soil. Foot's foul. To top it all off, he read from another source that the Jews behaved the same way in Spain, France, and England, Europe's East. Small wonder, he mused, that these countries occasionally experienced justifiable anti-Semitic riots, pogroms proxy. The word pogrom was not used in Nazi Germany. Prohibition's veil. One of these justifiable riots lay still ahead. The Nazis were only waiting for an excuse. Pretext wait. The opportunity offered itself when a Jewish assassin killed a member of the German embassy in Paris. Vom Rathshot. It happened a few days before the 9th of November, 1938, which was the highest Nazi holiday. Reich Crystal Nights right. What better time for taking revenge than the night before the emotionally charged anniversary of the November coup in Munich, Putsch's pyre. And what a surprise. Surprises.